Hi, Mr. Nam.
Hello.
I have a few questions for you. Who is your role model and why?
I would say that my role model would be my commanding officer from my time in the Korean Army. As an interpretation officer, he showed me that to be a successful interpreter, you have to prepare daily. He also showed me that if you want to have consistent success, you have to look out for the well being of the members of your team. As an interpretation officer, my commanding officer's primary role was to interpret operational briefings from high ranking generals in the Korean and US armies. But when he prepared for these briefings, he didn't prepare for them just one day or one week in advance. He would prepare up to 1 month in advance, and he would prepare daily. This is how he would prepare. Twice a day, he would hold information sessions with the interpretation team, and he would interpret hypothetical and actual operational scenarios in Korean and English. So by the time for the briefing came and he had to interpret, his delivery was perfect and he had no nervousness, no deficiency of any kind. But my commanding officer wasn't just excellent in his preparation. He also knew how to look out for the needs of the team. As members of the interpretation team, my job and the job of other soldiers in the team was to provide written translation for the briefings and also to provide research for our commanding officer. Sometimes for 2 week operations, we would have to work 16-hour days during the duration of the operation. Obviously, we would be very exhausted. But our commanding officer always made sure that at the end of the 2 week operations, which we held throughout the year, we would get a guaranteed 3-day furlough, every single member of the team. Because of this, we had a lot of incentive to work hard consistently throughout the entire duration of our service in the Army.
Wow. Well, what is more important, creativity or efficiency?
I would say that while both are important, in the beginning as an entry level job participant, it is more important to be efficient. For example, I used to work as an entry level interpreter at a small Korean church in Incheon. I interpreted Korean sermons into English for local Filipino congregant members. But when I first started out, I had nowhere near the expertise or skill level or stage presence to come up with creative interpretations of the pastor's sermons for the Filipino congregation. For me, as an entry level interpreter, it was much more important for me to get the basics done, to be on time, to interpret within 5 seconds of the pastor, and also to give as basic a interpretation as possible, even if I didn't fully understand the terminology. For example, in one of the pastor's sermons, the pastor tried to tell the Filipino congregation that they need to think bigger, think not inside the box, but outside of the box. And he used a Korean term. He said that you need to stop being an 우물 안에 있는 개구리. And being an entry level interpreter, I interpreted that as stop being a frog, a, a, a frog in a small pond. But when I became more experienced, I should have interpreted it as just think outside of the box. But as a basic entry level interpreter, it was okay because they understood the nuance of that, and it was more important for me to say something that made sense within the first 5 seconds rather than to wait for the perfect interpretation.
Yeah, what's your ultimate goal?
I would say that my ultimate goal is to be a natural interpreter in church settings for international speakers who come to Korean Christian conferences. I want to be able to provide the content, but also the emotion of the original speaker. I've been a fan of international speakers from Christian churches in America since I was a child. But one of the things that I felt as a bilingual speaker is that many of the interpreters seen at international Christian conferences here in Seoul or in Busan in Korea tend to provide the content without providing the emotions of the original speaker. For example, one of my favorite speakers is the missionary Heidi Baker from Mozambique. She talks about very emotional testimonies. She talks about how just 2 months ago she talked about how a man forgave his father's murderer, and the topic of her sermon was about how it is important for us to forgive if we are to accept God's love. When you are delivering a sermon like that, when you are interpreting a sermon like that, you want to be able to provide the emotion of forgiveness, the emotion of forgiving something that cannot be forgiven or forgotten. Doing this kind of interpretation is what I want to do for the rest of my life and as a career.
Wow. Well, thank you for your time, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Thank you.